Back in February, Germany went through what you might consider to be its most dramatic election since the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The ruling Social Democratic Party, or SPD, suffered its worst defeat since the time of Otto von Bismarck in 1887. Above all though, this collapse paved the way for the alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, a populist party that's often associated with the far right and which has also been linked to neo-Nazis. Nonetheless, the AfD triumphed across Germany's eastern states, marking the highest vote share achieved by any far-right party since the Nazis themselves. By contrast, the BSW, a far-left party that maintained similar positions to the AfD on immigration and friendliness towards Russia, performed far better in the east as well. Put together, the AfD and the BSW achieved almost half of all votes in Thuringia, Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Then there's Die Linke, the moderate successor party to East Germany's former Communist Party, which also performed far better in the east. All this contrasts sharply with the black of the Christian Democratic Union in the west, one of Germany's more traditional parties that is more centre-right on the political spectrum. Yet, when you put these results on a map, a ghost appears. The dividing line between who voted east and who voted west almost perfectly resembles the former Iron Curtain, the border that separated communist East Germany from the capitalist West for decades between 1949 and 1990. But that's far from the only time you'll see this ghostly border. Take this map showing unemployment rates across Germany, where you can clearly see the former Iron Curtain between East and West. Here's another showing the proportion of German citizens with a migrant background, or this one showing population change from 1990 to 2023. Satellite imagery showing Berlin at night even shows a clear divide that precisely follows that of the Berlin Wall. Even now, the city's streetlights glow differently depending on which side of the wall you stand. All of this begs the question, why then, after 35 years since the collapse of the Iron Curtain and the reunification of Germany in 1990, are East and West Germany still so divided today? And what might that mean for other divided societies that may wish to reunify in the future, like North and South Korea? To answer this question, we need to understand the events that took place in Germany following the end of the Second World War, and how it led to the divisions that we still see today. You see, following the collapse of Hitler's Third Reich, Germany was left in a state of disrepair. The Allies had collectively dropped more than 1 million tons of bombs on German cities, but the damage wasn't equal. Besides cities such as Dresden, Magdeburg and Berlin, which were left in ruins, East Germany was largely spared from the destruction faced further to the west. But this head start over the west turned out to be a Trojan horse. When the Soviets expanded into Europe following the war, Stalin began to impose enormous war reparations on the newly formed German Democratic Republic in the east, whilst pursuing a far stricter policy of denazification than what was seen in the west. Factories, railways and even power plants were dismantled and shipped east as reparations, whilst a large share of East German industry was nationalised and swallowed up by the Soviets too. West Germany, meanwhile, never faced the same reparations, and instead received more than $19 billion worth of foreign aid through the United States Marshall Plan to help with the reconstruction. One side was being rebuilt, the other was being emptied. Under Soviet occupation, East Germany found itself isolated from the Western world. It lacked the distinct geography, natural resources, and navigable waterways that allowed West Germany to flourish and relied almost entirely on the Eastern Bloc for trade. Then, in 1949, Germany was split between two different states as the Soviet and Western occupation zones coalesced into their own independent countries. West Germany evolved into a capitalist market economy aligned with the West, whilst East Germany evolved into a communist one-party state under Soviet influence. The city of Berlin, meanwhile, though surrounded by Soviet territory, was divided between a capitalist West and a communist East. For the next 41 years of history, this was how Germany would be politically divided. Right from the beginning, East Germany would be at a disadvantage. Capital, resources and labour were all dictated by the country's political class rather than by the logic of the market, whilst its system of harsh political repression encouraged migration to the West. Though it never became Europe's North Korea, East Germany was nonetheless a deeply authoritarian and paranoid police state. Its state security apparatus was the Stasi, one of the most intrusive secret police forces in human history. At its peak, the Stasi operated a vast network of informants throughout East Germany, so much so that by the 1980s, as many as 1 in 6 of its citizens were feeding information to the state. Nearly everyone had a file, with more than 1 billion pages of records tracking conversations, relationships, even planting bugs and surveillance devices in people's homes, cars and places of work. Of course, that level of paranoia and state repression drove people to flee. Between 1949 and 1961, nearly 3 million East Germans had migrated westwards, many of whom used a political loophole in Berlin. Though the Iron Curtain had turned the east-west frontier into a militarized no-man's land, an East German visiting the enclave of West Berlin could secure their safe travel to West Germany without attempting to cross the border. For the East, that loophole came at a cost. Many of those migrating west were young professionals and skilled workers, the sorts of people East Germany could least afford to lose. So, to stop this bleeding out, the East German authorities began constructing a concrete wall around West Berlin. This, of course, became the infamous Berlin Wall, a complex series of floodlit fortifications, guard towers, and death strips patrolled by East German border guards with strict shoot-to-kill orders on anyone attempting to cross it. For 28 painful years, the city would be split in two. But for what it's worth, the Berlin Wall did exactly what it was designed to do. East to west migration dropped to almost nothing overnight, and of the 100,000 people who did try to escape, only about 5,000 made it, while at least another 136 were killed. Still, in many ways, life in the East wasn't all that bad. Women, for instance, were encouraged to enter the workforce, and so East Germany was able to achieve the highest rate of female employment ever seen in world history. A staggering 91%, leagues above even modern Germany's nationwide rate of 56%. Childcare, meanwhile, was made universal and cheap, with state-run nurseries open Monday to Friday to support full-time working mothers. Abortion was legal, in contrast to the West. Paid vacation was a constitutional right, and housing was often readily accessible. So, whilst political freedoms and opportunities lagged behind the West, life in East Germany wasn't universally a worse experience. In many ways, it was actually better, and many East Germans lived fulfilling lives that they were truly proud of. Having said that, prosperity was decades behind. That was hard to ignore. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and negotiations began on reunification, East Germany found itself staring down the barrel. Within just 11 short months in 1990, Germany formally reunified, and the East German government ceased to exist. Yet this wasn't a merger of equals. Nowadays, many remember this event as a new Germany rising from years of Cold War division. But this isn't what happened. When the German Democratic Republic, the East German government, came to an end, the territories belonging to East Germany were simply absorbed into the West. The East had no bargaining power, and so it had little choice but to adopt the Western economic model. Upon reunification, the Ostmark, East Germany's currency, was abolished and replaced at a 1-to-1 exchange rate with the West German Deutsche Mark, which became the sole currency in Germany from this point onwards. Though reasonable at the time, this decision was catastrophic for East German business. Wages, utilities, and bills all repriced to West German levels, but productivity remained the same. A car factory in the East suddenly had BMW-level overheads and wages, whilst still producing far lower quality Trabants. Of course, nobody was choosing a Trabant over a BMW, and so East German business collapsed overnight. Then came privatization. A new agency called the Treuhandanstalt was tasked with selling off thousands of state-owned firms to private owners. Given that businesses in the East were now uncompetitive, most were either shut down or sold to Western investors at fire sale prices. By the time it was dissolved in 1995, the Treuhandanstalt had shut down almost half of these firms outright, whilst an overwhelming 85% of those sold were sold to Western buyers. This economic shock became a sink-or-swim scenario that many Germans struggled to adapt to. Unemployment in the East soared to above 15% and remained that way through the 1990s. So, as you might have guessed, many who could leave did. Millions of East Germans packed up and moved west in search of better opportunities, most of whom were young and educated. Though some Westerners did move east, most of those who did so were wealthier and bought up desirable properties in eastern cities, pushing many native Easterners out to the more run-down fringes. This mass migration from east to west only further devalued the East's economic output and productivity. Social infrastructure began to collapse, as villages emptied, schools and hospitals closed, and rural communities hollowed out. Universal childcare, once a cornerstone of East German life, was slashed, whilst many women were pushed out of the workforce. In turn, the fertility rate in East Germany collapsed as many people delayed or just gave up on the idea of having children. Even today, if you visit some East German towns, it would be rare to see anyone under the age of 50. Over time, these differences were patched up. The West poured €2 trillion into the East to rebuild neglected infrastructure, to transition its economy from a communist industrial one to a more service-based capitalist one, and to give its citizens better social services. Nonetheless, scars from the decades of division remain. GDP per capita in the East is still only about 80% of the West, while Easterners often work longer hours for lower pay due to lower productivity. Less than 5% of top German CEOs or federal judges come from the East. So for many who live here, reunification wasn't a celebration, it felt like annexation. Their industry was sold for scraps, their jobs disappeared, their children were forced out, and their communities slowly dwindled away. That history is hard to forget. Many Easterners were forced to completely rebuild their lives in 1990, only to be left worse off. It shouldn't be surprising then that many of these people are reluctant to undergo another major societal upheaval, particularly from migration and demographic change that could undermine the gains they've made since the 1990s. That reluctance, combined with skepticism towards mainstream West German parties like the SPD and CDU, who led the reunification of Germany, has fueled support for non-mainstream parties. The AfD on the far right and the BSW on the far left thrive in the East by promising to resist change, whether it's from migration, historical affinity towards Russia, or integration into the European Union. The divide isn't just political, it's rooted in memory, identity, and resentments. While the Iron Curtain fell 35 years ago, what followed is a lesson for the world. Whether in Korea, Cyprus, or elsewhere, tearing down a wall is easy, but healing a divide can take generations. I hope you managed to learn a thing or two from this video. A lot of effort goes into making them, and if you haven't yet subscribed, now would be a good time to do so. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.